The new nanny sang a lullaby to the boss's son. The Mafia boss froze, realizing who she was. The rain had been falling for 3 days straight over the Voss Estate, turning the long driveway into a river of black water and broken leaves. Damien Voss stepped out of the armored black SUV without waiting for his driver to open the door. His black coat was already soaked at the shoulders before he even reached the front steps. He didn't notice the rain. His mind was still in the warehouse on the east side of the city, where 2 men who had tried to cross him were now nothing more than stains on the concrete floor. That was his world. That was the price of the empire he had built with blood and silence. The massive oak doors opened before he touched them. His head of security gave a short nod, but Damien walked past him without a word. The only sound in the grand hallway was the ticking of the old grandfather clock and the distant rumble of thunder. He was halfway up the curved staircase when he heard it. A voice, soft, female, singing. Damien stopped mid-step. The voice was coming from the east wing, from his son's room. It wasn't loud. It wasn't trying to be heard. It was the kind of singing that belonged to someone who thought they were completely alone with a child. He moved without thinking, his polished shoes silent on the marble, as he reached the half-open door of Leo's bedroom. The lights inside were dim, just the warm glow of the bedside lamp. Leo was already in bed, his small body curled under the blanket, eyes heavy with sleep. And standing beside the bed was the new nanny. She had started only that morning. Elena, 21 years old. No criminal record, clean background. That's what the file had said. She was humming at first, her fingers gently brushing Leo's hair back from his forehead. Then, softly, she began to sing. Sleep, my little one. Close your eyes. The storm outside will pass you by. In my arms, you're safe and warm. Nothing in this world can do you harm. Damien's hand froze on the doorframe. The words hit him like a bullet he hadn't seen coming. He knew that lullaby. He had heard it only once in his life. 12 years ago, on a night that still lived in the darkest part of his memory. A small house on the edge of the city, the sound of gunfire, the smell of blood, and in the middle of all that chaos, a woman's voice singing these exact same words to a terrified little girl hiding under the table, a girl who had looked straight at him, with wide, broken eyes, before he pulled the trigger. Damien's breath caught in his throat. His chest felt tight, like someone had wrapped iron chains around his ribs. He couldn't move, couldn't look away. The woman in front of him, this nanny, had the same soft tone, the same gentle rhythm. It was impossible. It couldn't be her. But the song didn't lie. Elena finished the last line and leaned down, pressing a light kiss on Leo's forehead. The little boy was already asleep, a small smile on his face. She straightened up, turned slightly toward the door, and that's when she saw him. Damien Voss stood in the doorway like a statue carved from ice and shadow. His face was pale. His stormy grey eyes were locked on her, with an intensity that made the air in the room feel heavier. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. Elena's smile faded. She didn't know why the most powerful man in the city was looking at her like she had just ripped open an old wound he had spent years trying to bury. Damien's voice, when it finally came, was low and rough. "Where did you learn that song?" Elena blinked, confused by the question. "My mother used to sing it to me when I was little," she answered softly. "It always helped me sleep during storms." Damien didn't respond. He just kept staring at her, as if trying to see through her skin and into the past she didn't even remember. He had buried that night deep in his soul. Until tonight. 3 hours earlier, Elena Moretti stood in the tiny kitchen of her cramped apartment on the south side of the city, staring at the eviction notice taped to her fridge. The paper was already turning yellow at the edges. Final notice. She had exactly 7 days before the landlord changed the locks. Her fingers trembled slightly as she folded the paper and slipped it into her bag. She couldn't let her little brother see it. From the next room came the sound of cartoons playing on an old television. 11-year-old Nico was sitting cross-legged on the floor, laughing at something on the screen. That laugh was the only thing that still felt pure in Elena's life. She had raised him since she was 16. Their mother had died when Nico was only 3. Their father, well, Elena didn't like to think about what had happened to him. Some nights she still woke up hearing gunshots in her dreams. Other nights, she remembered the lullaby her mother used to sing when the world outside felt too loud and dangerous. She had buried those memories as deep as she could, but the song never really left her. Elena glanced at the clock on the wall. She had to leave soon if she wanted to reach the Voss Estate before sunset. The agency had called her that morning with the news. She had gotten the job. Full-time live-in nanny for Damien Voss's 6-year-old son. The pay was almost double what she had expected. Enough to cover rent, Nico's school fees, and maybe even the medical bills that still came every month from her mother's old treatment. She didn't know much about Damien Voss, only what everyone in the city knew. He was powerful, untouchable, the kind of man who owned politicians and made problems disappear. Some people whispered he was dangerous. Others said he was just a very rich, very private businessman. Elena didn't care either way. She needed the money. And Leo Voss was just a child. How bad could it be? She walked into the living room and sat beside Nico on the worn-out couch. "I got the job," she said quietly, brushing his messy hair back. Nico looked up at her with big brown eyes. "Does that mean you're going to live in that big house now?" "Only during the week," Elena answered, forcing a small smile. "I'll come home every weekend. I promise." Nico nodded, but she could see the worry in his face. He had already lost too many people in his short life. Elena hated that she was adding one more absence to his world. She stood up and walked to the small mirror near the door. Her reflection stared back at her. Tired eyes, dark circles she couldn't hide anymore, and a face that looked older than 21. She tied her long dark hair into a simple ponytail and adjusted the second-hand blouse she had, ironed 3 times. Before leaving, she leaned down and kissed the top of Nico's head. "Be good for Mrs. Ramirez next door, okay? And don't stay up too late." "I won't," he mumbled. Elena picked up her old suitcase, the same one she had used when she ran away from the system at 16. She paused at the door and looked back at her brother one last time. For a second, she almost changed her mind. But then she thought about the eviction notice, about the hospital bills, about how Nico deserved better than this broken life. She stepped out into the cold evening air and closed the door behind her. As she walked toward the bus stop, Elena had no idea that the job she had just accepted wasn't just going to change her future. It was going to drag her straight back into the past she had spent 12 years trying to forget. Damien Voss didn't sleep that night. He stood in his private study on the top floor of the estate, the city lights glowing faintly through the floor-to-ceiling windows behind him. A half-empty glass of whiskey sat untouched on his desk. His coat was still damp from the rain, but he hadn't bothered to change. In his hand was a single photograph. It was Elena's file photo from the agency. Simple, ordinary, just a young woman with tired eyes and a quiet smile. But to Damien, it felt like staring at a ghost that had somehow learned how to breathe again. He had seen thousands of faces in his life. Most of them he forgot within hours, but there were some faces that stayed with him forever, burned into the back of his mind like scars that refused to fade. Hers was one of them. 12 years ago, in a small house on the outskirts of the city, he had stood in a room filled with smoke and blood. A woman had been on her knees, begging, and under the table, hidden in the shadows, a little girl had been singing that same lullaby to herself, trying to block out the sound of her mother's screams. Damien had looked straight into that girl's eyes before he pulled the trigger. He had told himself she wouldn't survive, that even if she did, she would never remember his face. He had buried that night so deep that even his closest men didn't know the full story. And yet tonight, that same voice had sung in his own house, to his own son. His jaw tightened. He picked up his phone and dialed a number he only used when he needed answers that couldn't. The Selv. The call was answered on the first ring. "Sir, I want everything on the new nanny," Damien said, his voice low and cold. "Not the agency file, the real file. Every school she attended, every address she's lived at since she was 9 years old, every person she's ever been close to. I want to know what she eats for breakfast and what she dreams about at night." There was a short pause on the other end. "Understood. Anything else?" Damien's eyes stayed fixed on Elena's photograph. If anyone tries to dig into why I'm asking, make sure they don't ask again. He ended the call without waiting for a response. For a long moment, he just stood there in the silence of his study, the weight of old sins pressing down on his chest. He had built an empire by never showing weakness, by never letting the past reach him. But tonight, the past hadn't just knocked on his door. It had walked inside and sung to his son. Damien walked over to the large window and looked out at the dark estate grounds. Somewhere in the east wing, Elena was probably asleep in the guest room they had given her, unaware that the man who signed her paycheck had once destroyed everything she once called family. A muscle twitched in his jaw. He had two choices. He could make her disappear quietly, the way he had made so many problems vanish over the years, or he could keep her close and find out exactly what she remembered. Neither option felt safe. Damien turned away from the window, his expression unreadable, but deep in his storm-gray eyes, something dangerous had begun to wake up, something that hadn't moved in 12 long years. Elena stood outside the heavy wooden doors of Damien Voss's study, her palms slightly damp. She had already been given the job by the agency, but they told her Mr. Voss wanted to meet her personally before she officially started. It was just a formality, they said. It didn't feel like a formality. The mansion was too quiet, too big, the kind of silence that made her footsteps echo even when she tried to walk softly. Two armed men stood at the end of the hallway, watching her without expression. She kept her eyes down and knocked lightly on the study door. "Come in." His voice was deep, calm, and cold. Elena pushed the door open and stepped inside. The study smelled of leather, old books, and something expensive she couldn't name. Damien Voss sat behind a massive dark desk, his black shirt sleeves rolled up to his forearms. He didn't stand when she entered. He simply looked at her. For a few seconds, he didn't say anything at all. Elena felt her throat go dry. There was something in the way he was staring at her, like he was trying to remember something, or like he already knew her from somewhere. She forced a polite smile and clasped her hands in front of her to stop them from shaking. "Good morning, Mr. Voss. I'm Elena Moretti. The agency sent me." Damien leaned back in his chair slowly. His stormy grey eyes never left her face. "Sit." It wasn't a request. It was an order. Elena sat down on the edge of the leather chair across from him, her back straight, trying to look confident, even though her heart was beating too fast. She had done many interviews before, but none of them had felt like this. Damien picked up a single paper from his desk. Her file. He didn't look at it. He kept looking at her. "You started working as a nanny at 18, he said. It wasn't a question. "Yes, sir. You've moved apartments 5 times in 3 years. Elena hesitated. "Yes. Rent was difficult sometimes. And you have a younger brother, Nico." Her stomach tightened. She hadn't mentioned Nico in her application. The agency only knew basic details. "Yes," she said carefully. "He's 11. Damien nodded once, but his expression didn't change. He leaned forward slightly, resting his elbows on the desk. The movement made Elena instinctively lean back in her chair. "Why did you choose this job?" he asked. His voice was quiet, but there was weight behind every word. "Most nannies your age want to work for normal families, not men like me." Elena swallowed. She could feel sweat forming at the back of her neck. "I need the money, Mr. Voss," she answered honestly. "The pay is good. And your son, he deserves someone who will actually care about him." For the first time, something flickered in Damien's eyes, but it disappeared just as quickly. He stood up. Elena's body tensed on instinct. She didn't know why. He hadn't raised his voice. He hadn't done anything threatening, but something about the way he moved, slow, controlled, like a man who was used to people being afraid of him, made the air in the room feel heavier. Damien walked around the desk and stopped a few feet away from her. He was much taller than she expected. She had to tilt her head slightly to meet his gaze. "The job is yours," he said. "You'll live here during the week. Your brother can visit on weekends if you want. But Elena," he paused. His next words came out low and deliberate. "If you ever feel like this house is too much for you, you can leave. No questions asked. But once you're here, I expect loyalty. To me, and especially to my son. Elena nodded quickly, her voice barely above a whisper. I understand. Damien studied her face for a few more seconds, like he was searching for something. Then he gave a small nod. Someone will show you to your room. You start tomorrow. Elena stood up, her legs feeling slightly unsteady. As she turned to leave, she could feel his eyes still on her back. She didn't know why, but she suddenly felt like she had just agreed to something much bigger than a simple nanny job. And for the first time since she walked into this mansion, she wondered if she had made a mistake. Elena's room was bigger than her entire apartment back home. She stood in the middle of it, suitcase still in her hand, staring at the king-sized bed, the walk-in closet, and the large window that overlooked the dark gardens. Everything smelled new and expensive. It didn't feel like it belonged to her. She changed into a simple white blouse and black pants, tied her hair back, and took a deep breath. This was her job now. She had to focus on the child, not on the strange way Damien Voss had looked at her during the interview. At exactly 8 p.m., she knocked on Leo's bedroom door. The little boy was already in his pajamas, sitting on the bed with a storybook in his hands. He looked smaller than she expected. His dark hair was messy, and his eyes carried the same stormy gray color as his father's, but without the hardness. "Hi, Leo," Elena said softly, smiling. "I'm Elena. I'll be staying with you from now on." Leo didn't smile back. He just studied her for a few seconds, then nodded once. He was quiet, too quiet for a 6-year-old. They spent the next hour reading stories and playing with his toy cars on the carpet. Slowly, Leo started talking. He told her about his favorite dinosaur and how he didn't like the dark. Elena listened to every word like it mattered, because to her, it did. By 9:30, Leo was yawning and rubbing his eyes. Elena helped him get into bed and pulled the blanket up to his chest. The room was quiet, except for the soft sound of rain tapping against the window. She sat on the edge of the bed and gently brushed his hair back, just like she used to do with Nico when he was younger. Without thinking, she started humming. Then, softly, she began to sing. "Sleep, my little one. Close your eyes. The storm outside will pass you by. In my arms, you're safe and warm. Nothing in this world can do you harm." Her voice was gentle and steady. Leo's eyes slowly closed. Within minutes, his breathing became deep and even. He was asleep. Elena sat there for a little longer, watching him. For the first time since she arrived at this cold mansion, she felt something close to peace. She didn't notice the tall figure standing just outside the slightly open door. Damien Voss had come to check on his son before heading out for the night. But the moment he heard the first line of the lullaby, his entire body went still. He stood frozen in the hallway, one hand gripping the doorframe so tightly that his knuckles turned white. His breathing became shallow. The same song, the same voice, the same words that had haunted him for 12 years. His chest felt tight. Images flashed in his mind. Blood on the floor, a woman screaming, a little girl hiding under a table, singing this exact lullaby to herself so she wouldn't hear the gunshots. And now that same song was being sung to his own son. By the time Elena finished and leaned down to kiss Leo's forehead, Damien had already stepped back into the shadows. He didn't go inside. He couldn't. He walked straight to his study, closed the door, and picked up his phone with hands that were not entirely steady. The call connected almost immediately. "I want a full background check on Elena Moretti," Damien said, his voice low and dangerous. "Not the surface one. I want to know everything. Where she was born, what happened to her parents, every place she's lived since she was a child. I want it by tomorrow morning." He paused, then added one more line. "And tell the team, if anyone tries to hide anything from me, they'll regret it." He ended the call and stood in the dark study for a long time, staring at nothing. Down the hallway, Elena was walking back to her room, completely unaware that the most dangerous man in the city had just ordered a deep investigation into her past. And somewhere in that past, buried under 12 years of silence, was a truth that could destroy them both. Damien was still in his study when the sun began to rise. He hadn't slept. The whiskey glass from last night was still sitting on his desk, untouched. He had spent the entire night going through every detail of Elena's life that he already knew, trying to find a way to make sense of what was happening. At exactly 6:45 a.m., there was a knock on the door. "Come in." Dorian, his most trusted man and underboss, walked in carrying a thick black folder. He placed it on Damien's desk without a word and stepped back. Dorian had worked with him for 8 years. He knew when to speak and when to stay silent. Damien opened the folder. The first page had Elena's full name in bold letters. Elena Sofia Moretti. Born March 12, 2005. Mother, Isabella Moretti. Deceased. Father, Marco Moretti. Deceased. Damien's eyes stopped on the next line. Last known address. Age 9. 47 Willow Lane, South District. His jaw tightened. He remembered that address. He had stood in that exact house 12 years ago. He remembered the small living room, the broken coffee table, the woman on her knees begging for her daughter's life. He turned the page. There were old photographs, crime scene photos from that night. One of them showed a little girl with dark hair being carried out of the house by a police officer. Her face was buried in the officer's chest, but Damien didn't need to see it clearly. He already knew who she was. Elena had survived. According to the report, she had been placed in the system after that night. She had no living relatives willing to take her in. She bounced between foster homes until she turned 16 and ran away. Since then, she had worked odd jobs, raised her younger brother, and stayed completely off the radar. There was no record of her ever talking about that night. No therapy reports. No police statements. It was as if she had erased those memories completely. Damien closed the file slowly. For a long moment, he just sat there, staring at the black folder like it had personally betrayed him. He had spent 12 years believing that part of his past was buried forever, and now the only living witness to his darkest night was sleeping under his own roof, taking care of his son. Dorian finally spoke, his voice low. "What do you want to do with her, boss?" Damien didn't answer right away. He stood up and walked to the window, watching the early morning light spread across the estate grounds. Somewhere in the east wing, Elena was probably already awake, getting ready to start her first full day as Leo's nanny. He could make her disappear today. One phone call, and she would be gone before sunset. No one would ask questions. No one would look for her. But then he thought about Leo. His son had smiled more in one evening with Elena than he had in the past 6 months. The boy had actually fallen asleep without fighting, without nightmares. For the first time in a long time, Leo had looked peaceful. Damien's hands curled into fists at his sides. He turned back to Dorian. "Keep watching her," he said quietly. "I want to know every move she makes, every phone call, every time she leaves this house. But no one touches her. Not yet." Dorian nodded and left the room. Damien picked up the file again and opened it to the photograph of 9-year-old Elena being carried out of that blood-stained house. He stared at it for a long time. Then he spoke to the empty room, his voice barely above a whisper. "You should have stayed dead, Elena Moretti." Elena had been at the Voss Estate for 4 days now. Every morning, she woke up early, helped Leo get ready for the day, and spent hours playing with him in the garden or the playroom. The little boy had slowly started opening up to her. He laughed more, he talked more, and every night, without fail, he asked her to sing the lullaby before he slept. But something strange was happening to Elena. The longer she stayed in this house, the more she felt like she had been here before. It wasn't anything obvious, just small things. The way the staircase curved at the bottom, the smell of the old books in the hallway, the sound of rain against the large windows. Sometimes, when she was alone, she would stop walking and stare at a painting or a door like she was trying to remember something, just out of reach. She told herself it was nothing. She was tired. She was overthinking. But deep down, a quiet voice inside her kept whispering that something was wrong. That afternoon, Elena was sitting with Leo in the sunroom. He was drawing with crayons while she read a book. The room was warm and quiet. Leo suddenly stopped drawing and looked up at her. "Elena," he said in his small voice, "do you have a daddy?" Elena closed her book slowly. "I used to," she answered gently. But he's not here anymore. Leo nodded like he understood. Then he asked another question. Did someone take him away? Elena felt a strange tightness in her chest. She didn't know why that question hit her so hard. Why do you ask that, Leo? The little boy shrugged and went back to his drawing. My daddy says some people disappear when they do bad things. He says he makes sure they never come back. Elena stared at him. For a moment, she didn't know what to say. Leo was only 6. He shouldn't be saying things like that so casually. Before she could respond, she felt it again. That feeling. Like she had heard those words before. Somewhere far back in her memory. A man's voice. Gunshots. Her mother, crying. She shook her head quickly, trying to push the feeling away. Leo kept drawing like nothing had happened. That evening, after putting Leo to bed, Elena walked through the long hallway toward her room. She passed by a door that was slightly open. It was Damien's private study. She knew she shouldn't look inside, but something made her stop. On the wall behind his desk, there was a large painting of a stormy sea. Elena stared at it. Her head started hurting. For a split second, she saw a different room in her mind. Smaller, darker, with blood on the floor. She blinked hard. The image disappeared. Elena stepped back quickly, her heart beating faster than normal. She didn't understand what was happening to her. Why did this house feel so familiar? Why did Leo's innocent words make her feel scared? She didn't notice Damien standing at the end of the hallway, watching her. He had seen the way she stared at the painting. He had seen the confusion and fear on her face. And for the first time since she arrived, he felt something close to fear himself. Because Elena Moretti was starting to remember. And if she remembered everything, Damien didn't know if he could let her live. That night, Elena couldn't sleep. She lay in the large bed, staring at the ceiling, listening to the rain outside. Every time she closed her eyes, fragments of old memories kept flashing in her mind. Things she didn't understand. A small house, her mother's voice, scared and crying, the sound of heavy boots on wooden floors, and that lullaby. She was singing it to herself while hiding under a table. Elena sat up suddenly, her breathing fast and uneven. Sweat covered her forehead, even though the room was cold. She got out of bed and walked to the window, trying to calm herself down. These weren't just dreams. They felt too real, too specific. She had spent years telling herself that her parents died in an accident. That's what the social workers had told her when she was 9. That's what she had believed all her life. But now, pieces were coming back, and none of them matched what she had been told. The next morning, Elena was quiet during breakfast with Leo. She kept looking around the house like she was seeing it for the first time. Every corner, every hallway, felt strangely familiar, like a place she had been to in another life. After putting Leo down for his afternoon nap, Elena did something she knew she shouldn't. She started walking through parts of the mansion she wasn't supposed to enter. She passed by the long corridor that led to Damien's private wing. At the end of the hallway, there was a door that was always locked. Today, it was slightly open. Elena hesitated for a few seconds, then slowly pushed it open. Inside was a small room, filled with old boxes and files. She stepped inside carefully. On one of the shelves, she saw a dusty black folder with a label that made her heart stop. Moretti Case, 2014. Her hands started shaking. She opened the folder with trembling fingers. Inside were old photographs, crime scene photos. She saw her old house. She saw her mother's body on the floor. And in one of the photos, she saw herself, a 9-year-old girl with wide, terrified eyes, being carried out by a police officer. Elena covered her mouth with her hand to stop herself from making any sound. This wasn't an accident. Her family had been murdered. She flipped through more pages until she found a list of names. At the very bottom, in bold letters, was written, Suspect, Damien Voss, no charges filed. Elena felt like the floor had disappeared beneath her feet. She stumbled backward, almost knocking over a box. Her mind was spinning. Damien Voss, the man whose son she was taking care of. The man who had been watching her so closely since the first day. He was the one who destroyed her family. Tears filled her eyes as she quickly put everything back and rushed out of the room. She ran back to her own room, locked the door, and slid down to the floor, breathing hard. For the first time in 12 years, Elena Moretti remembered the truth. Her family hadn't died in an accident. They had been killed, and the man who killed them was sleeping under the same roof as her. 2 days later, Elena was still pretending. She smiled at Leo. She sang to him at night. She did her job like nothing had changed. But inside, she was falling apart. Every time she saw Damien in the hallway, or heard his voice, her stomach twisted with fear and hatred. She wanted to run. She wanted to take Leo and disappear. But she couldn't. Not yet. She needed to understand why Damien had spared her 12 years ago, and why he had brought her into his house now. What she didn't know was that someone else had already found out about her. In a dark warehouse on the other side of the city, 3 men sat around a table. One of them slid a photograph across the wooden surface. It was a clear picture of Elena, walking in the Voss Estate garden with Leo. "Her name is Elena Moretti," the man said. "She's living in Damien Voss's house, taking care of his son." The man sitting at the head of the table leaned forward. His name was Marco Rossi, the current head of the Rossi family, and Damien's biggest enemy. "Moretti," he repeated slowly, "as in the family Voss wiped out 12 years ago." "Same one," the man confirmed. "She was just a kid back then. Somehow she survived, and now she's inside his house." Marco Rossi smiled coldly. "Interesting. Very interesting." He tapped the photograph with his finger. "Damien Voss has no weaknesses, no family, no attachments. That's why he's been untouchable all these years. But if this girl is who we think she is, then she's either his biggest mistake or his biggest weakness." One of the other men spoke up. "What do you want us to do?" Marco leaned back in his chair. "Watch her. Every move. I want to know when she leaves the estate, who she talks to, and if she's planning something against Voss. If she's there for revenge, she might be useful to us. And if she's not," he paused, "then we'll make sure Damien watches her die." That same night, Elena felt it. She was walking back from the garden after putting Leo to bed when she noticed a black car parked far down the road, just outside the estate gates. It hadn't been there before. The windows were tinted. She couldn't see who was inside, but she could feel someone watching her. She quickened her steps. When she reached her room, she locked the door and stood against it, breathing hard. Her hands were shaking. First the file, now this feeling that someone was following her. She didn't know who to trust anymore. She didn't know that Damien was already aware. In his study, Damien stood in front of multiple screens, showing live security footage. One of the cameras had caught the black car. His men had already identified it. Dorian stood beside him. "Rossi family," Dorian said quietly. "They know she's here." Damien's face remained calm, but his eyes were ice cold. "They think they can touch what's mine," he said. Dorian looked at him. "Do you want us to handle it?" Damien didn't answer immediately. He kept staring at the screen where Elena was pacing inside her room, clearly scared. Then he spoke. "Double the security around her wing. No one gets close to her. And Dorian," he turned to look at his underboss, "if anyone from the Rossi family tries to reach her, kill them." Slowly, Elena didn't sleep that night. She sat on the floor of her room until 3 a.m., staring at the wall, replaying every moment she had spent in this house. Every smile she gave Leo, every time she sang to him, every time Damien had looked at her like he was seeing a ghost. She had been living under the same roof as the man who murdered her family, and she had been taking care of his son. By morning, something inside her had broken. She waited until Leo went to his afternoon lessons with his tutor. Then she walked straight to Damien's study. She didn't knock. She pushed the door open and stepped inside. Damien was standing by the window, talking on the phone. When he saw her face, he slowly ended the call. "Elena," he said calmly. "What's wrong?" She didn't answer with words. She walked to his desk, picked up the black folder she had hidden under her jacket, and threw it onto the table. The photographs spilled out. Crime scene photos, her mother's body, her 9-year-old self being carried out of that house. Damien looked down at the photos. For the first time since she had met him, something close to pain crossed his face. Elena's voice came out shaking with rage. You killed them. Damien didn't deny it. He didn't even try. Yes, he said quietly. Elena felt like someone had punched her in the chest. She had hoped, even for a second, that maybe it wasn't true, that maybe there was some mistake. But hearing him admit it so easily shattered whatever was left of her heart. You killed my mother, she said, her voice rising. You walked into our house, and you shot her like she was nothing. I was 9 years old, Damien. I was hiding under the table. I watched you kill my family. Tears were streaming down her face now. But she didn't care. I trusted you, she whispered. I took care of your son. I sang to him every night, and the whole time, you knew who I was. Damien stepped closer. His voice was low and rough. I didn't bring you here to hurt you, Elena. Then why? She screamed. Why did you let me into your house? Why did you let me get close to Leo? Was it some kind of sick game? No, Damien said sharply. It wasn't a game. He looked at her with eyes that were no longer cold. When I heard you singing that lullaby to my son, I thought I was losing my mind. I spent 12 years believing you were dead. And then you walked into my life again. I should have sent you away that first night, but I couldn't. Elena laughed bitterly through her tears. You couldn't. After what you did to my family, Damien's jaw tightened. Your father was working with my enemies. He betrayed me. I was ordered to end it. I did what I had to do to survive. But that little girl under the table. His voice cracked slightly. I have never forgotten her eyes. I have never forgotten that song. Elena stepped back, like his words had burned her. Don't, she said, shaking her head. Don't you dare try to make this about guilt. You destroyed my life, and now I'm standing in your house, taking care of your child, while the people who killed my mother are walking free. She wiped her tears with shaking hands. I hate you, she whispered. I hate that I ever felt safe here. Damien didn't move. He just stood there, watching the only person who had ever made him feel something close to human look at him like he was a monster. And for the first time in his life, Damien Voss had no idea what to say. The attack came at midnight. Alarms blared across the entire estate. Red lights flashed in every hallway. Elena was in her room when she heard the first gunshot. She ran to Leo's room and found him already awake, terrified and crying. Elena, he screamed. She grabbed him and held him tightly against her chest. It's okay, baby. I've got you. I won't let anything happen to you. But deep down, she didn't know if that was true. Gunfire echoed through the mansion. Damien's men were fighting back, but the Rossi family had come prepared. They had broken through the east gate and were moving fast toward the main house. Elena heard footsteps running toward their hallway. She quickly hid Leo inside the closet and told him to stay quiet no matter what. Then she grabbed a heavy lamp from the table, ready to fight if she had to. The door burst open. 2 armed men entered. One of them pointed his gun straight at her. Elena Moretti, the man said with a cold smile. Marco Rossi sends his regards. You're coming with us. Before Elena could react, another voice cut through the room like a blade. Touch her, and you die. Damien stood in the doorway, blood already staining the sleeve of his white shirt. He had been shot in the shoulder, but he was still standing. His gun was raised, steady and deadly. The 2 men turned toward him. Elena's heart was pounding so hard she could barely breathe. This was her chance. Damien was injured, distracted. She could pick up one of the fallen guns and end this right now. She could finally get revenge for her mother. Her hand moved toward the gun on the floor. But then she heard Leo crying softly from inside the closet, and something inside her broke. She didn't pick up the gun. Instead, she stepped in front of Damien, just as one of the men raised his weapon. The bullet grazed her arm instead of hitting him. She cried out in pain, but didn't move. Damien's eyes widened in shock. Elena, he fired twice. Both men dropped to the floor. For a moment, everything went quiet, except for the sound of their heavy breathing and the distant gunfire outside. Damien looked at her, his face pale from blood loss. Why? He asked, his voice rough. After everything I did to your family, why did you protect me? Elena's eyes were filled with tears. She was shaking. Because I'm not like you, she whispered. I won't become a monster just to get revenge. And because Leo doesn't deserve to lose his father tonight. She stepped closer to him, pressing her hand against his bleeding shoulder to stop the blood. "I hate you for what you did," she said, her voice breaking. "But I can't let Leo watch you die. Not like I watched my mother die." Damien stared at her, like he was seeing her for the first time. In that moment, with bullets flying outside and death all around them, something shifted between them. It wasn't forgiveness. Not yet. But it was something real. Something dangerous. Elena looked him straight in the eyes. "If we survive tonight," she said quietly, "you're going to tell me everything. No more lies. No more secrets. And if I decide I still want to kill you after that, you won't stop me." Damien gave a weak, bloody smile. "Deal." He reached out with his good hand and gently touched her cheek, leaving a smear of blood on her skin. "But Elena, I'm not letting you die for me either." The sun was rising when the last gunshot finally faded. The Rossi family had been pushed back. Many of their men were dead or captured. The estate was damaged, but it was still standing. Damien's men had won. Barely. Elena sat on the floor of Damien's bedroom, her hands covered in his blood. She had helped carry him inside after the attack. The doctor had already come and gone. The bullet had been removed from his shoulder, and he was now resting against the headboard, pale but alive. For a long time, neither of them spoke. Elena was the one who finally broke the silence. "I could have let you die tonight," she said quietly, staring at her blood-stained hands. "I had the chance. I could have picked up that gun and ended it. For my mother, for everything you took from me." Damien didn't look away from her. "I know," he said. Elena's eyes filled with tears again. "But I didn't," she whispered. "And I don't know what that makes me. I don't know if I'm weak, or if I'm just tired of all this blood." Damien reached out slowly with his uninjured hand and gently held her wrist. His touch was surprisingly soft. "You're not weak, Elena," he said. "You're the strongest person I've ever met. You had every reason to hate me, to destroy me, and instead, you chose to save me." She looked at him, her voice shaking. "I don't forgive you, Damien. I can't. Not yet. Maybe not ever. What you did to my family, it broke something inside me that I don't know how to fix." Damien nodded slowly. He didn't try to defend himself this time. "I know," he said, "and I won't ask you to forgive me. But I will ask you for something else." He looked at her with tired, honest eyes. "Stay, not because I'm forcing you. Not because of the money. Stay because Leo needs you. And because I don't want to go back to the man I was before you walked into this house." Elena closed her eyes. Tears rolled down her cheeks. She thought about Nico, about her old life, about how easy it would be to walk away right now and never look back. But then she thought about Leo's small face when he called her name during the attack, and she thought about the way Damien had looked at her when he thought she was going to die for him. She opened her eyes. "I'll stay," she said softly, "for Leo, and because I'm not ready to walk away yet. But Damien," she looked at him with clear, steady eyes, "if you ever lie to me again, if you ever hurt me, or my brother, I will leave, and I won't come back." Damien gave a small, tired smile. "Understood." Elena stood up slowly. Before she left the room, she turned back one last time. "I'm not your redemption, Damien," she said. "I'm not here to fix you. But maybe we can try to build something that isn't built on lies and blood. For Leo's sake, and maybe for ours too." She walked out of the room, leaving Damien alone with her words. Outside, the sun was fully up now. The estate was quiet again. Somewhere down the hallway, Leo was calling her name. Elena took a deep breath and wiped her tears. She didn't know what the future held, but for the first time in 12 years, she wasn't running from her past anymore. She was choosing to face it.